Shabbat Shalom. We are counting the Omer. And counting the Omer is commanded in this parsha. How fortunate. It's a lovely confluence that does tend to happen at some point this time in the year. We are counting the days between Passover and Shavuot. 7 weeks, we are told in Leviticus, in the section right before we began to formally read today. We count off 7 weeks. And each day an offering of barley was brought to the sacred precincts, culminating in the wheat harvest on the 50th day. And though we no longer bring the offering of barley, because this is an innovative tradition, we now offer the gleanings of our hearts. And many people who give themselves the blessing and luxury of doing so count off these days in a mystical way. Over time, each of these 7 weeks has been assigned a quality, and then the qualities work together in pairs to be a quality in a quality for each day. And there are beautiful teachings and exhortations, exercises and spiritual practices that are given for each day of the Omer. Today, this Shabbat, is day 28 of the Omer. We have just concluded the week whose primary characteristic is netzach. Netzach is a word you hear in our services, in our liturgy going through, netzach, netzachim, etc. But it's not an easy word to translate. It's given a number of translations, but the one that is associated primarily now with the Omer teachings that are the most widespread is that netzach means endurance. What an appropriate quality upon which to focus at this particular time. Endurance. And on this day 28 of the Omer, the particular pairing of the themes is Malchut of Netzach, the idea of nobility in the quality of endurance. And these wonderful materials, primarily shared by Aish.com, but used widely and slightly varied, but Aish has been kind of the gold standard in these last years, presents this day's assignment in this way. Nobility is the cornerstone of endurance. Endurance is a tribute and testimony to the majesty of the human spirit. Let us ask ourselves, each of us, is my endurance dignified? Does it bring out the best in me? When faced with hardships, do I behave like a king or a queen, walking proudly with my head up, looking to the future and confident in my divinely given strengths? Or when faced with hardships, do I cower and shrivel up in fear? Is there nobility in our endurance? And so the exercise for the day that we are offered is to fight for a dignified cause. Could that be any more appropriate? Fight for a dignified cause. Now, each of us will hear that call in a different way. We are each endowed with the ability to discern and choose what is a dignified cause that calls us to be a soldier for what we hope is an eventual triumph. We may not live to see that glory, but we can surely join the fight. And when our children tell our story, they may tell the story of this night. I thank Lin-Manuel Miranda and his extraordinary Hamilton for that last quote. A dignified cause. Friends, all across this country, there are people marching today for the cause of reproductive autonomy. When it comes to this searing and really terrifying subject, the Jewish legal source material is actually pretty thin. But the question of reproductive autonomy, of course, has gained new urgency after the events of these last 2 weeks, where a Supreme Court draft opinion was leaked a week ago Monday, laying out a forceful argument for overturning Roe v. Wade, the 1973 decision that legalized abortion nationwide. The vast majority of American Jews, it won't surprise you, at least 80%, according to Pew Research Center work, supports the right to a safe and legal abortion. But the Jewish legal view differs depending on denomination, and even then, very much on whom you ask within that denomination. Anyone who has faced this question, this decision, will tell you that even the specter of it is absolutely overwhelming, really as it ought to be. Jewish legal opinion begins with a verse in Exodus 21, verse 22, which institutes a financial penalty against a man who injured a pregnant woman, causing her to miscarry. Rashi, the 11th century commentator, notes that since the consequence is only monetary, this indicates the Torah's view that a murder has not been committed. And modern scholars extrapolate from Rashi that abortion is at worst not a capital crime. The Orthodox world is quite varied on the question, but almost exclusively comes down, at least, on the side of preserving the mother's life when the pregnancy would endanger hers. Rabbi Avi Shafran of Agudat Israel wrote in 2019, "Blanket bans on abortion, to be sure, would deprive Jewish women of the ability to act responsibly in cases where abortion is actually halachically required, that is, to save the life of the mother. And so what Orthodox groups like Agudat Israel of America, for which Rabbi Shafran works, have long promoted is the regulation of abortion through laws that generally prohibit the unjustifiable killing of fetuses while protecting the right to abortion in exceptional cases." Many Orthodox leaders have rushed to distance themselves from the religious right that has been at the forefront of the anti-abortion movement. Rabbi Sarah Hurwitz, head of Yeshivat Maharat, an Orthodox women's seminary, says, "Orthodox Judaism's view of abortion does not align with the extreme religious right of today. While there is a range of opinion on the sources, the Jewish system shows tremendous compassion for the circumstances of the mother, for the family, and the viability and health of the fetus." She says, "I have had the sad fortune of helping several families navigate their decision around abortion. Jewish law recognizes that for some families, abortion is a necessary choice." The Rabbinical Assembly, the organization of conservative rabbis, codified in 1983 a ruling that a fetus does not have legal status as a human until it is born, clearing the halachic path to permitting safe and legal abortion. In addition to the Exodus verse, the ruling cites the halacha that a pregnant woman who converts does not need to separately convert the child after birth. It is said that in the case of children who have Tay-Sachs, abortion would be permitted not out of mercy for the baby only, but out of compassion for the mother. In its 7-page decision, however, the RA made clear that abortion was anathema to Jewish concepts of the sanctity of life. Abortions to only ensure the mother's quality of life, it said, were impermissible. But in an interview last week, Rabbi Bradley Shevet Artson, dean of the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies at American Jewish University in Los Angeles, said that a shift toward deference to women's autonomy had occurred in the conservative movement in the decades since that ruling, precipitated in part by the now widespread ordination of women and LGBT Jews. The idea that men should decide on women's behalf is increasingly intolerable, Rabbi Artson said. The conservative movement has become more and more aware of the right of people to self-advocacy and self-determination. Additionally, Rabbi Artson said, as the American religious right has increased political pressure to restrict abortion, conservative organizations have leaned further into advocacy in the other direction to protect their religious freedom. So by and large, the textual basis for the conservative understanding is the same as that of the Orthodox. Only on the question of which circumstances permit a woman to have an abortion, whether concern for the mother's well-being extends to her psychological and emotional state, there the movements diverge. Rabbi Danya Rutenberg wrote, "In Judaism, a fetus is not regarded as an independent being. It is part of the body of the person carrying it." And the Reform movement, which holds that a woman's bodily autonomy is a matter of kavod habriot, the Jewish principle of respect for life, they have been advocating for reproductive autonomy for decades. Inveighing against a Bush administration ban on late-term abortions, Rabbi David Ellenson, a national leader of the Reform movement and Chancellor Emeritus of Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, said that Jewish religious tradition surely accords the fetus status as a potential life. However, Judaism does not regard the status attached to the fetus as potential life as morally equivalent to the condition enjoyed and entitled to by the mother as actual life. That position was echoed by Mara Nathan, senior rabbi of Temple Beth El, a Reform synagogue in San Antonio, who cited the same section in Exodus considered by Orthodox legal authorities. Mara Nathan said the Reform movement views abortion as a human right, and she anticipated universal condemnation from the movement's umbrella organizations to what seems to be an inevitable overturning of Roe v. Wade. No one says that using abortions as a form of birth control is an appropriate choice, Nathan said. But the emphasis from the Reform perspective is on a woman's right to choose to carry her pregnancy or not. They should be given the freedom as human beings to make a decision about their own health, their own bodies, and I would add, their own families and their futures. Our assignment for this day is to fight for a just cause. And if that just cause is, for anyone listening, the desire and support of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, then I would also ask that you turn your strengths, your energies, to the very just causes that all of humanity faces. And so many particular and peculiar aspects of this country that we call home. We do not have a national law providing for paid family leave in this country. We do not provide proper and reliable child care, support for new mothers, prenatal care, early childhood education, affordable housing, job training, education, psychological support, mental health care, contraception access, counseling for survivors of rape and domestic abuse, or even the most basic environmental protections to provide for a world that is safer, cleaner, and more hospitable to the children that are born into it, whether they are able to be cared for, whether they will be loved or not. And so regardless of where each of us stands on this trajectory of removing from the women, the birthing people of this country, access to safe and legal abortion, perhaps today we can at least pledge together to, in whatever way you can, support the creation of a sustainable, supportive, healthy, peaceful world. May all of the children yet to be born who are begging us to do so have that blessing when they arrive, please God, safely and into the arms of people, a family, a society, and a world that will care for them. Let us fight for that just cause on this day. Let it be noble, and let us endure together. Shabbat Shalom.